novelist Rachel Edwards lives and writes nearby in Preston Cromarsh. Her first book, Darling, was published to acclaim in 2018. Her story follows the fast-evolving relationship between a black British woman, Darling, a divorced nurse and carer to her disabled son, and her white stepdaughter, Lola, the child of widower Thomas, the man Darling marries. The book is set immediately after the UK's Brexit vote and deals with the themes of racism and the rise of the British right. Rachel's break came in her 20s when she won a National Fiction Award from the Arts Council. She worked as a freelance writer for more than 10 years, until in 2016 she chose to focus full-time on her fiction. She is now finishing her second novel with its working title of Lucky. Rachel is our ambassador for Author Talks and has very kindly agreed to be the subject of our first virtual one. I began by asking her what she considered to be her earliest influences as a writer.
I remember being influenced, well, by the classics, typically in my youth. When I was about 7 or 8, I think that's from the time I thought I would love the idea of becoming an author. But long before that, I was a mad keen reader, like most authors, like lots of us. And originally, there wasn't this incredible wealth of children's books. Yes, there were Enid Blyton, there were Mallory Towers, lots of books like that. But really, children's writers come so much in that time. I was encouraged to read the classics. So I was reading at 11. I was, blown away by Jane Eyre and completely, passionate about that. That's the first book that I picked out with my father when we went to Foyles on a trip to London, that only ever trip to London together. So I had that made a big impact on me. So classics, lots of Dickens, lots of Agatha Christie, another local author. She had a big influence, and I thought, wow, how do you keep us guessing until the end? But really, I think a blow-away moment for me was when I read some Alice Walker with The Colour Purple and Maya Angelou, African American writers. I hadn't seen black women writing at all, and that suddenly made me think, is this something I could do? Is this about me? It's not just about people long deceased or men, typically white males. I just thought, actually, this is something, maybe it's speaking to me in a different way. So that was an early influence for me, those African American female writers, and Toni Morrison, of course.
Was their style that inspired you as well? I mean, you're talking about a lot of books.
Their style inspired me, but the fact that they existed inspired me, really, because African American writing at that time, it was still very alien. I mean, it still isn't even now. It's a different experience. It's not the same as what I've lived through. But it's just the fact these women existed. They kind of looked like me. They probably had, like, Tony had plaits or dreads or whatever like me, and I was like, okay, and you're writing, is that allowed even? When I was 12, that's how I felt about it. In terms of actual classical influences, I was as powerfully influenced by anyone who's read, for example, Dickens, who's read it, the classics, but also people who maybe, some people think, not so popular these days, but maybe aren't seen as a PC, like Martin Amis. The way he plays a sentence, he blew my mind. I thought, how do you get to give your naughty characters all the best lines, and all the men had the best lines? I thought, I would like women who get the best lines, So he, in a weird way, influenced me quite a lot. When I read the Rachel papers, I thought, wow, you were 21, 22, and you wrote that. So it's not always the obvious influences that kind of had an impact, to be honest.
You wanted to be a storyteller, but you chose to be a novelist. And in my view, being a novelist is kind of the most difficult of the lot. This is a big, big slice of writing for every time you tell a story. Why the novel?
I believe it's because the novel is the form that most profoundly influenced me from a young age. So whilst, like most children, you read, necessarily short stories because you're young, they in themselves were complete little works. And as I grew older, I read longer works. And by the time I read the novel form, I suppose fairly early on, I was hooked. This to me seemed the purest form of expression of a story, and it still does. I know we have a plethora of ways in which we can express stories now, not just for, I don't need to tell you about wonderful films and dramas and plays, but for me, I wasn't a playwright, I wasn't a TV writer, I was a film writer necessarily. The novel was the one that touched me, the one that took me away elsewhere, the one that stimulated my ideas most deeply, the one that fired me up. And it's provocative and exciting, and yet it had a long history stretching back that way, and I wanted to be part of something that was going forward with it. So it really engaged me. Yeah, I get shivers just thinking about the novel gets me all worked up. And it has to be like that, I suppose.
It is extraordinary because I've lived through the death of the novel for 40, 50 years. It was always, everyone used to say that's the form that's going to cease. And yet it seems to be more powerful than ever. So off you set and you write your first novel, Darling, and you open the book and it's clearly about dysfunctional families. And I go, oh, not again. And then I think, well, hang on. Oliver Twist, Great Expectations, Vanity Fair. People have been writing about dysfunctional families since the novel began, really. It kind of seems to be its A plus theme. And you chose to write about a stepmother and a stepdaughter as the central theme. Why was that?
Well, I am a stepmother myself, as you know, and I have a stepdaughter, also a stepson, both of whom utterly wonderful, and now they're past university age. But it is I've always thought, and not just me, I mean, historically it has been seen to be the stepmother-stepchild relationship is interesting in literary terms because it's not what offers plenty of exposure of the unexpected. In fairy tales, as has been widely discussed, it is the wicked stepmother is a trope, and I wanted to explore that as well because I came into my family with the kids, and they were 5 years old, and it's a very different situation. My novel, Darling, I've loved them full time and raised them with my husband until they're now gone 22. But I wanted to explore difference and conflict and otherness from a perspective that could maybe use some of these historical presentations of the stepmother, which I'd explored and lived for myself, but also surprise people's expectations with it. So you go down one path and you think the stepmother is this way, and you think she would be, wouldn't she? Because if you know anything about me as an author, you might maybe predict the outcome, and you having read it might think that outcome's slightly different. But also I wanted to predict conflict because it's about conflict that's not necessarily about the dysfunctional family. It's more about the country at a time of massive dysfunction. Us as a society is a massive time of dysfunction and polarization, and that's what I wanted to explore. So the family was essentially a microcosm of Britain at the time of the Brexit vote, and we have obviously since had huge challenges that we could not have seen since then, but at the time when I wrote this in June 2016, that was what was really exercising my mind.
What's interesting as well is both families are broken. So someone's dead and someone's missing.
There's a lacuna. There's a lacuna there, isn't there? There's a sense of loss, and there's a vacuum which will be filled. And Darling, in one sense, goes into a family and fills a certain vacuum in a way, without spoiling my own ending of my own book. I think that's what happens, and that can happen often in life. And I think that's interesting. Interesting me, that dynamic about someone who has their own history, as we will do, but going into almost as if they were to solve a problem, as if to be a missing part of a family. How does that work, and why does it work or not? Why does it not work? I wanted to explore it really. I didn't have ready answers because I'm still happily, with my loving family, and you met them having a great time. But this is a challenge. It is a challenge for people. We've moved on huge in society whereby the nuclear family is no longer as much the norm. And I wanted to explore that again, I say, to look at the bigger political idea of what was happening in the country, family as a microcosm of the country. That was the idea, yeah.
I think it's worth explaining to people that novelists draw from their experience. They're not actually writing their experience. There's this terrible tendency in readers to think, oh, well, that happened to her, It's almost as though the imagination doesn't exist.
Thank you so much. I love that question because you're absolutely right, that point that you've made, because I was slightly taken aback, maybe naively, by how many people said, oh, you're Darling, then you have written about you, and you as a creative person will understand that it's about creation. It's an act of imagination. while you may be inspired by not just your own life and life of others, other ideas, you draw, and it can be magpie like the process of creation. And yes, there are truths there are truths, but not necessarily facts from my life. So that's how it mulches down into a new form. And it has to be, the truth of the entirety has to be, is what matters. The book has to work as a whole, and the truth of Darling was what matters to me as an author. So it's not about just churning out bits of my life that I'm scribbling on the page, and I know you totally understand that. But you're right, some people don't necessarily think that's true. And on that point, I've reflected, I've noticed that it's changing, but in recent years it's changed a bit. But typically, I think, maybe controversial, but male authors, so I mentioned Miles James, for example, I don't think he's ever been asked about, oh, so Money, was that you then? You know, or Rachel, is that you? Do you know what I mean? I think men having creative agency has been presumed to be the norm, and not so much for women. And, you know, I think not just women or women of colour or whatever, I think that people are starting to realise that actually, yes, there's acts of imagination that can be capable in people that you might not expect, including me.
There are two other quite deep themes in Darling that I want to explore. We're not going to talk about the plot because that would be silly, but I'm very interested by the way you handled racism in the book. And you start off, and I'm going to read you a couple of quotes, which made me laugh out loud. The first quote is about the black woman, and the central character says, "I had since my teens been amazed by the hoo-ha surrounding the fertile black female. We were seen as either ors, diva or drudge, Dahomey Amazon or post-colonial night nurse, lightning rods for the whole ho Madonna issue. We were each of us a continent of contention." I know you get much darker about it. And there's one other wonderful quote. "They talk about the black community as if we all, from Somalis plucked wet from the Med to third generation Tobagonian barristers, hung out together in a warehouse made of breeze blocks somewhere off the North Circular."
Okay, I should laugh my writing bit, yeah.
It's kind of brilliant because it gives it the lie.
Me, honestly, I felt in this book, I felt such an anger, I felt such a fire when I read this book, and maybe that's often the case with debut novels, but I felt so fired up. I had years of things that I wanted to get out of, off my chest, and yet they were to be relevant to the book. So I had thought about these things, and I think the first draft, it's fair to say, if I'm really honest, was maybe a bit of an outpouring, a bit of invective, and another thing, and ranting on the page. But a nice word of my editor, who, was like, okay, and now let's draw it back. but the essence of it's still there, and it's better for it, rather than just me pouring out my feelings. Just to take that on, in terms of one of the reasons I wrote this book, I had been in a local town, and I have lived in this area for many years, over 20 years, and I was born in Britain, so I know what it feels like to be a British person. I also know it feels like to be a black British person. I'm half Jamaican, half Nigerian, so I have as a wealth of influences coming my way, but I'm very much a British person. And it wasn't until around this time, and you cast our mind back to how disrupted the country was and how unsettled everything was, and I was walking in a town that's very well known to me, not far from here, and someone called out, a shirtless man called out from up high on scaffolding, said, it was within 48 hours of the Brexit vote, and he said, if I were that girl, I'd leave the country. And I was so utterly shocked by that, because I thought, well, this is a town that I'm very familiar with, and no one usually, I know the nuances and the way that we interact with each other in this country, and that's not usually the way. So something had to change. I think since then, actually, it's moved on. At the time, it was all very tense, and it was an unusual time, and I wanted to reflect some of that. But there's also experiences I've had that I don't think still have been reflected that much in the what one would now call mainstream, literature. Yes, now if I look at someone like Bernie Evaristo, she talks about being a black British woman. She's won the Booker. It's a fantastic book, Girl, Woman, Other. But when I wrote this in 2016, there were still very few. I mean, there are not many writers that look like me, and I feel a certain responsibility and a privilege to be able to talk about it from my perspective, because I have lived it, and I've been lucky in lots of ways, but I have things to share and insights to offer. And I think I should do that as part of my writing, not only about race, but certainly as part of it.
Darling is a nurse.
Mm.
And there's a lovely quote where you say, nursing was love, that simple and that complicated, love, time-stamped and dished out to strangers. And at this particular moment we're living through, I thought that was particularly quite extraordinary, really. I mean, it's more or less summing up what's going on.
What's happening now, and we look at our carers and our frontline workers and our nurses and our doctors, and I think about them all the time. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but my mother was an NHS nurse for 40 years. So yes, she's from Jamaica originally, and she came here in the 60s, 66, I think it was, as a nurse. And she is a vocational nurse. She didn't do it, it wasn't an economic decision. She's a nurturer. She's a gardener. She's a mother of four. She's a grandmother. You know, she cares, and it mattered to me how, and it still absolutely does matter to me how these people in our NHS are treated. Not just those who have, you know, migrated here, but anyone who puts themselves out there. So I said, it is love times and discharge strangers. And my father was a GP. My father was a surgeon from Nigeria. He was the first to go from his village, in fact, to go to his university, and he, through education, you know, became a doctor. And so they both worked for the NHS for many years. And I think now, because of, you know, the terrible situation we've found ourselves in, but also there's a positive, is that the recognition of those who have given and given and are still giving and giving right now at this moment, of all backgrounds, all races. And that's what matters, isn't it? And we know now, I think maybe as a society we've recalibrated and just remember just how important this really is and how extraordinary it is, that people do this.
There you are, you're writing this thing, and one of the things about writers is all of us, we write for strangers. I mean, essentially, they're your audience, the people you don't know. And did you worry about the reaction just before it was published, or were you?
You know, I was both. Sometimes I was really bullish, and sometimes I was terrified. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get, well, you know, I don't want to put it out there, but I was worried about the reaction. I was writing about the rise of the far right. And that's something that, you know, you can't do lightly as anyone really, but as a woman of colour. And I think, well, okay, they're going to come after me on Twitter or whatever. People have been very receptive, and there are always going to be naysayers. But I think I was worried, but I was also prepared. I thought, do you know what, I need to say this. I stand by every word. And you will understand the process of writing a novel, and it gets copy edited and it gets edited, and you get lots of chance to look at it and revise it. And by the end, I stood by every word, and I thought, I have to feel like that, but to go out into the world. I was very nervous. I think it could be nerve-wracking, that period just before your launch, and everyone gets a jitters, everyone goes slightly bonkers. I know from my other author friends that everyone kind of loses the plot a bit before their book maybe comes out. But yeah, I was nervous, but also I was thinking, okay, I feel that it's right to me, and you have to have that, don't you, as an author? I think you have to have that instant, that gut. You have to have a fantastic editor who you trust and whose judgment you trust, but also you have to trust yourself and think, for me, this is right. This is what I want to say, and I will live with the consequences. Publish and be damned, huh?
Every time. And now you've done that, and it's been received well, quite rightly. But now you've decided to do it again. I always think the second novel is actually the most difficult, because there is an expectation. I mean, how did you approach doing the second novel? Did you want to go to different themes? What did you want to do?
I wanted to explore, yes, a different theme. I felt very strongly. I have friends who are some fantastic writers of, for example, psychological thrillers, and they have a series. So they have maybe key detective with a series and all. I wasn't doing that. I wanted to write at this stage. I mean, I never say never, but really, I want to write standalone books. So in that, because I was doing that, I never wanted to write the same book twice. It's very important to me that it's different and explores different things, because life is short and there's lots of ideas out there to explore, and that's what interests me. That's what I felt would capture my readers' interest. So I did have this book two, which I can reveal, it should be called Lucky. I hope that's the case. That's the name of it at the moment. I had ideas from before I wrote Darling, actually. And I wanted to explore that in a fresh way. I wanted to be more ambitious for my own interest. I wanted for myself, push myself more as a writer, if I possibly could, but also look at things in a different way. So this book is in the third person, and it explores the idea that we are all gamblers. So it's a different take on life. It has a social political interest as well. It looks at migration and movement of people, but essentially it's not that kind of toxic two-hander that I had with Darling. That was a particular book for a particular time, very much a particular time. It hopefully has themes that resonate, but now I've moved on and I want to look at something fresh and new.
Is it a contemporary novel? Is it of today?
It starts about 2018. Yes, recent. The reason I wanted to look at this is that I looked at the world of online gambling. I've explored that and found it. I don't know about you, but I just noticed so many more ads and people driving people to do this gambling that we never used to do as in a country. You know, in between cricket, my husband's a great cricket fan, and so I've watched a lot of, seen some laws, and now every ad break there's a Bet 365 or whatever it is. That's become part of the culture. It just wasn't even 10 years ago, and prior to the National Lottery, it wasn't at all. So it really has, and I read lots of articles, and there are books out there, non-fiction books, talking about how people have been hooked in by this. So there's that, but also I talk about the wider gambles we take, all of us take, huge gambles in life. And I wanted to have a think about the migrant crisis and how that's moved people around the world. And also, I suppose as a child of, I wouldn't exist if it weren't for immigration. My parents both meeting here from two different continents. So my immigration has always been at the forefront of my mind, not in the back of it, So I want to explore that, really.
Did it work in the same way as the first? Did you have the same sort of struggles, or was it actually coming more easily to you?
In some ways, no. It had initially. It wasn't as easy because even though I had an idea, and people said, "Oh, your second book is harder." It's true because there is this expectation. So you put this pressure on yourself. But with Lola and Darling, because it's first person, their voices, I can only liken it to being an actor in their role. So I was thinking as Darling, and I was thinking as Lola, and I was inhabiting the role, which might sound terribly pretentious, but I really was. It's the only way I was channeling Darling as I wrote her, because it's first person, so you had to hear her voice coming through. Very much the same for Lola, a 16-year-old girl. I had to be thinking as her, and she was speaking to me, and that's how it worked. And so it's an entirely immersive experience. This is immersive but in a different way because it's third person, and I always thought, before Darling, I thought I was very much always going to write in the third person. That's more me, which is maybe a silly thing to say as you're going to set out in a lifetime of writing. But at the time, I thought, no, I'll do third person. Darling just took me by surprise in that way. But so it's taken a step back. But it has become more immersive, actually. It's become entirely immersive. And I think it needs to. If it's going to work, you have to be living it. So I'm living it, but in a slightly different way. And, I'm enjoying it. I'm coming towards the end of it now, in terms of edits and so on. But it's a different experience, and I hope every book will be a different challenge and a different experience. I think that's probably how it might work.
Do you worry less about the reception now you know you can do it, if you know what I mean?
No, I don't think I'll ever worry less. I think I know authors who have written, far more books than I have, and I think if I stop worrying, I'll probably stop caring, and I don't want to do that. And I don't, that's probably the time to give up. So I'm always going to worry a bit. I'm always going to think that, is it good enough? I've also got to always tune into that gut instinct, thinking now it's ready, and relying on my brilliant team at Fourth Estate, HarperCollins, who know what they're doing and say, okay, it can go out into the world. But I never want to be complacent, and I never want to take it for granted that I can do it, because I don't think any author really always thinks they can do it. You stop, you get away from the screen for a day and think, oh, I've forgotten how to write. I'm hopeless. I think that's healthy. I think it keeps us on edge. It makes us maybe slightly strange characters as personalities, but keeps us on our toes.
I mean, we're talking at a very strange moment in this thing called lockdown, whatever that means. I mean, how's that affected you as a writer? Has it affected you at all?
It has. It's I think initially, in the early days of lockdown, I thought, oh, we're going to have lots of time. I felt my day-to-day, without being remotely smug and being aware of this huge situation we're in, I thought, well, my day-to-day won't actually change that much because I'm home-based. I'm here in my writing room, reading my books behind me, and I'm writing here every day, or around the house. But it's not that. It's not the physical setting, not the location that's changed for me. It's the headspace and just the awareness of this immense grief around us, and putting things in perspective the way it has for everyone, not just for writers or creative people, for everyone. It's reinforced what's important. It's shifted my priorities around. It's made me want to focus more. I've been grateful for time with family. Our children are here, my husband's here, but yes, I think all of us will be indelibly changed by this. And in this period of time, I have worked through it. I am writing every day. Not in the way I thought I would, though. I thought it'd be just a stretch of time. But we don't exist in this vacuum, and certainly not now. More than ever, I think we're aware of what's going on around in society and our community. Even though we can't, literally can't touch each other, we know what's going back and forth, and that's influencing my thoughts and my processes and my creative process as well. Yeah.
There's an old saying that there's a novel in everyone. Do you think that's true?
Well, I honestly believe that there's certainly a story and many stories in everyone. Whether there's a novel to be published in everyone, I think a novel to be published is something different. There are fascinating stories, and by all means, I think those people we all have lived, interesting lives in our own way. And I think if you want to get your story out, yes, by all means do. And maybe for some people, it's a case of recording it. There's all kind of process now. You can go to the internet, you can self-publish different things. Writing a novel publication is a challenge and a process. I think you have to really want it, and it's a different process. It's a creation of something, which is not to say it's rarefied and that not everyone can do it. Well, but a story to tell for your family or friends is one thing. A novel is something different. I don't want to sound precious by saying that, but I do believe that to be the case, and therefore and yet those who wish to be published, who believe that they are writers in their heart and they want to get out and process it, I absolutely encourage you and say, go do it, write every day and get it out there, because we all have stories to tell and your story matters. So I would say that.
So, well, my last question, which you've sort of answered, but I'm going to probe you on it,
Okay.
it's probably the oldest profession in the world, storytelling, much older than what's supposed to be. I think since people were articulate, even when they weren't articulate, they told stories. Why do you think we have that urge to tell stories?
I think, and I thought about this a lot, especially, I don't know if you ever listened to the Radio 2 series, what makes us human. I think about this a lot. What makes us human? Why is it important to us as human beings? And I've distilled down lots of thoughts about this over the little bit, but also I think that the need to create patterns, and not necessarily certainty, but patterns of our existence, and make meaning, to create meaning from what can seem like meaninglessness. And I think that is a deep primal urge. It's an existential drive that we come back to again and again and again. And it brings it back to one of your first points about the novel being important. While framing a moment of life, as we might do in a short story, even a profound moment can resonate with us and can be deeply important. But the novel, that pattern, that progression of a character, that journey of someone through a period of their history, will always be important to us. Creating that pattern and reflecting on it and looking at ideas, I think for me, that is something we need as much, if not more, than air, water, food on a good day. I think it's profoundly important to us. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for agreeing to do this for Fobble, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
My absolute pleasure. I've loved it. Thank you so much.